The flicker rate on the television is very, very important. It was timed to be so many cycles per second, and it actually just meets with the brain patterns for an alpha state.
We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged.
No
matter what the left calls, I am the world's proudest Jewish Nazi. And Tommy is my brother. Tommy is my friend. Tommy is my leader. Because Tommy stands for what is right, even when it's unpopular.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
This video contains the main body of key evidence for a 9/11 conspiracy and all the important facts one needs to know in order to understand the real masterminds behind this horrific crime. A major key to the 9/11 puzzle is the amazing story of FBI agent John O'Neill. John O'Neill was the FBI's leading expert on Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. O'Neill quit his job at the FBI after he was blocked from investigating the activities of several aviation students who were training at a CIA-connected flight school known as Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida. These men, who would later become the lead pilots accused of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, have a very interesting background. Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, once listed his address as the Pensacola Air Naval Station. He also liked to hang out at strip clubs and consume cocaine, two things that are strictly prohibited by Islamic law. These hijackers apparently got their Saudi passports as well as their funding through a man named Omar Sheikh, who had connections with both Osama bin Laden and General Mahmoud Ahmed of the ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence equivalent of the CIA. Ahmed was identified as the money man behind the $100,000 wire transfer to lead hijacker Mohammed Atta just days before 9/11. The ISI has a long history with the CIA, going back to the Iran-Contra scandal and a drug money laundering front known as the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. BCCI's tenants were, among others, Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and George H.W. Bush. In fact, BCCI is the only connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11 that is known to exist. Huffman Aviation also has a history with the CIA. Located next to Barnum and Bailey Circus, CIA agents were sent here to learn piloting skills at the flight school and sleight of hand from the magicians at the circus. So after the Bush administration blocked John O'Neill from investigating these potential terrorists, he left the FBI and was persuaded to apply for a position as head of security at the World Trade Center. He was hired to start on September 10th and died his second day on the job, the Tuesday of 9/11. The next day, Jeb Bush would have all the records from Huffman Aviation thrown into the back of a truck and hastily driven straight onto a C-130, which took off never to be seen again. Nothing suspicious or anything. But let's get back to Marvin Bush and his role on the board of directors for Securicom, which ran security at the World Trade Center up until June of 2000, when Kroll Associates took over. According to Elevator Magazine, there was a 9-month complete renovation done to the elevators and elevator shafts in the two World Trade Center Twin Towers performed by the Ace Elevator Company. According to William Rodriguez, a janitor at the World Trade Center, there was constant construction going on inside these buildings and tenants' offices were getting moved around quite frequently. Finally, according to Scott Forbes and Ben Fountain, there was a full-scale power down and evacuation of the Twin Towers the weekend before 9/11. And before the Monday when John O'Neill would take over as head of security. Given this series of events, it is certainly plausible that Marvin Bush, the president's brother, having full unrestricted security access to these buildings, could have cleared work teams dressed as elevator repairmen to rig these buildings with super thermite and other explosives. Blueprints and pictures show us that a simple cut through 1 or 2 inches of drywall inside the elevator shafts of the Twin Towers yields unrestricted access to 4-foot crawl spaces between floors, where explosives could easily be hidden throughout the building without detection. There was also $15 million worth of reconstruction going on in World Trade Center Building 7 in the months prior to 9/11, when Mayor Rudy Giuliani built an emergency command bunker on the 23rd floor and installed it with bullet and bomb-resistant windows and its own independent secure air and water supply. These renovations were applied only to the 23rd floor, however there were lots of workers going in and out of the building running cable. So we have represented possible time windows where explosives could have been planted inside of these buildings. We also have a series of suspicious events to further indicate something sinister was afoot at the World Trade Center on and leading up to 9/11. The testimony of figures such as Barry Jennings and many of the firefighters and rescue workers whose testimonies don't appear in the official 9/11 report draw further scrutiny to the government's version of 9/11, especially after Barry Jennings was murdered. Furthermore, those brave 9/11 first responders who did speak out also signed away their government-paid medical bills. In order to receive free medical treatment for cancer and respiratory illness from the toxic smoke which the EPA told them was safe to breathe, the 9/11 first responders also signed away their right to speak out publicly about the government and what really happened on 9/11. I hope this helps to explain the deliberate failure of the Keane Commission investigation into 9/11, who actually hired Henry Kissinger, a known political cover-up mastermind, to be the first head of the commission before he quit after he was questioned about his Saudi clients and his connections with the bin Laden family. He was replaced by Philip Zelikow, who helped Condoleezza Rice write the preemptive Iraq War invasion strategy and also happens to be author of a thesis paper on creation of public myth. How fitting. The most obvious indication that the entire government investigation and report on 9/11 is in fact a cover-up is the fact that the final report doesn't even mention World Trade Center Building 7. Building 7, the Solomon Brothers building, was the third World Trade Center tower to fall on 9/11. It fell late in the day after much of the city had been evacuated. At 5:20 p.m., this 47-story steel and concrete building collapsed straight into its own footprint in 6.5 seconds. In physics, for something to fall at the rate of gravity, there needs to be no resistance to its collapse, meaning that the support structure of the building would have to be removed by some external force, such as explosives, as there would be insufficient stored gravitational potential energy in this building to account for the massive high-order damage which was observed. Even if fire weakened the structure, it doesn't account for the symmetrical collapse of the building. Fire is an organic process which moves from one area to another as fuel is used up. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, was given the task of investigating the cause of collapse of these structures. It took 7 years for NIST to finish their report on World Trade Center 7, and independent professional analysis has found strong evidence that the NIST scientists are guilty of committing scientific fraud, since it can be proven that they lied about fire temperatures, thermal expansion of concrete, thermal conductivity of steel, removed shear studs, and added combustible fuel loads on the floors where the initial failures took place in their model, ignored prior knowledge of collapse as reported by Aaron Brown of CNN and Jane Stanley of the BBC, and the fact that World Trade Center 7's collapse looks identical to a controlled demolition and nothing like the NIST model. The science and the physics don't lie, and that's why the number of scientists, architects, and engineers who have signed on the petition for a new investigation continues to grow steadily bigger and bigger. If the collapses themselves weren't suspicious enough from a purely scientific standpoint, let's look at some underlying facts about World Trade Center 7. This was a secure federal office building that housed offices for the Department of Defense, Securities and Exchange Commission, FBI, and CIA. In fact, this was the largest CIA headquarters outside of Langley, Virginia. World Trade 7 was a federal building full of government agents whose primary purpose was to monitor the New York Stock Exchange. Investigations into money laundering, stock market fraud, insider trading, including the majority of Enron's financial records, were all destroyed in World Trade Center 7. Last but not least, World Trade Center 7 was the only off-site backup for the military's financial records. Due to the sensitive nature of allowing potential enemy countries to know how much our military is spending, they keep these black budget records classified and store them in highly secure places. The only other place these files are stored is in the Pentagon's Financial Accounting Office. Oddly enough, on September 10th, Rumsfeld announced that there was $2.3 trillion in unadjusted funds from the Pentagon budget, meaning that the money was unaccounted for, missing. The next day, all the files to track down where that money went were destroyed when something, allegedly Flight 77, smashed into the west wing of the Pentagon. Even more curious is that in the months prior to 9/11, there was a complete renovation of that section of the Pentagon as the walls were reinforced to withstand missile impacts. This was the only section of the Pentagon that had its walls reinforced. During that construction period, many offices and filing cabinets were moved around. It would appear that elite forces within the government used this opportunity to get rid of inconvenient files and people. Another interesting point is that there is no solid evidence to prove that Flight 77 actually hit the Pentagon. The damage pattern on the ground and building is inconsistent with a large commercial aircraft. The FBI or someone else confiscated all the 84 security cameras which caught the incident on tape, and only released 5 frames from one of them to the public. So this raises the puzzle that if a missile hit the Pentagon and not Flight 77, what happened to the real Flight 77 and all the passengers on board? A close, careful look at the passenger list might give us some clues. There are more top-secret security clearances on this airplane than there are in most medium-sized cities in America. Especially astounding in this bizarre passenger list is the preponderance of Navy personnel amongst the four armed services and a tilt toward propulsion and guidance systems amongst all of the possible secret technologies. It appears that these people were murdered in order to prevent them from talking about systems that they had worked to help set up. A close, careful look at the passenger list might give us some clues. There are more top-secret security clearances here on this passenger list than there are in most medium-sized cities in America. Especially astounding on this bizarre passenger list is the preponderance of Navy personnel amongst the four armed services and a tilt toward propulsion and guidance systems among all the possible secret technologies. One of those systems was an onboard warning and control system which could take control of any commercial aircraft and fly it by remote control. AWACS was developed by Systems Planning Corporation, a company owned by Bush's good friend Dov Zakheim. The prevailing conspiracy theory is that the planes were hijacked and flown into the buildings by remote control. This is further supported by the final flight maneuvers performed by the second plane to strike the World Trade Center. Since every amateur videographer in New York City had their cameras pointed up at the burning Tower 1, the second plane strike was filmed from nearly every conceivable angle. Expert analysis of this plane leads to some startling revelations. First, there is the expertly controlled flight characteristics of this plane. During its last 20 seconds of flight, UA-175 made a single corrective maneuver so perfectly timed and executed that it could not possibly have been piloted by human hands. Then there is the extra piece of equipment on the underside of the plane. This was analyzed by several experts who confirmed that it was not a Shadow, but a Martin Marietta AWACS flight controller, mounted underneath the front of the plane.
One of the things that jumped out at me when I looked at the footage of the video of Flight 175 as it went into the World Trade Center is it appeared to me that there was something on the under fuselage of that aircraft that did not belong there, at least not with a commercial airliner. Now, I'll tell you where I have seen attachments that look like that on military aircraft. So the question you have to answer now is, was that the commercial airliner that hit the World Trade Center, or possibly was it an aircraft that looked very similar but was a military type airplane?
All the recorded sources, all the different photographic evidence that was produced by CNN and ABC, they all show this pod. It's there. You can see it with your own eyes. And in my professional opinion, that there was a pod attached to the bottom of that aircraft, and therefore it was not United Airlines Flight 175.
They attacked Loose Change so severely for bringing this up that they actually got a lot of people to back off of it. Shortly after, they began a massive no-plane theory disinformation campaign to further obfuscate the truth. They would have their agents pose as conspiracy theorists and go on TV and radio shows to misrepresent the 9/11 truth movement, creating turbulence within and ridicule from the outside. According to Mike Ballone, a 9/11 rescue worker at Ground Zero who actually physically saw one of the black box flight data recorders taken from the World Trade Center rubble, said the FBI then confiscated the evidence and warned people not to talk about what they saw. Now, the official government story denies that they found any of the black boxes. However, if you look at every plane crash in aviation history, they always find the black boxes. Obviously, these black boxes contain information that the government doesn't want the public to see. So what really did happen to these planes? If you take a careful look at the flight paths of American Airlines 11 and UA-175, the two flights that took off from Boston's Logan Airport and crashed into the Twin Towers, you'll find a major clue. X marks the spot on this treasure map, as it turns out that not only did both these planes cross paths directly over Stewart Air Force Base, but they did so at the exact same time. Another odd synchronicity is Flight 93, which had been sitting on the tarmac delayed at the airport for nearly 40 minutes with no explanation. Originally scheduled to take off at 8:01 a.m., it was delayed until the moment that Flight AA-11 crashed into the North Tower at 8:43 a.m. It would appear that Flight 93 was their backup plane in case one of the other flights was intercepted. After all, you've got two towers rigged for demolition. You can't take the chance that one of these planes gets intercepted. Another interesting piece of evidence that ties Stewart Air Force Base to the center of this 9/11 conspiracy is the white mystery planes spotted over Washington and the Pentagon. Through careful investigation, we've been able to map out the flight paths of these two ominous aircraft, which have been identified as E-4Bs, a type of aircraft that the military uses as mobile command posts. What concerns me is that both of these aircraft took off from and landed at Stewart Air Force Base. Finally, none of this could have ever happened if NORAD and our military air defenses hadn't been deliberately dismantled. The planes would have been shot out of the sky much like Flight 93 appears to have been. Rumsfeld took away military authority to shoot down civilian airlines in June of 2001 and gave it back again in November. Operations Vigilant Warrior, Vigilant Guardian, Northern Vigilance, and Northern Guardian were military exercises that involved sending all our air defenses to Canada to fight an imaginary Russian fleet, placing false radar blips onto FAA radar, and running hijacked plane scenarios which effectively left the military with only 4 planes to defend the entire northeast sector, while the FAA at one point had as many as 22 hijacked aircraft on radar to deal with. Under normal circumstances, NORAD would have responded to a hijacked aircraft within an average of about 11 to 14 minutes.
I wanted to focus just a moment on the Presidential Emergency Operating Center. You were there for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. And we had that order given, I think it was by the President, that authorized the shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And so I was not aware that that discussion had already taken place. And but in listening to the conversation between the young man and the Vice President, then at the time I didn't really recognize the significance of that. And then later I heard of the fact that the airplanes had been scrambled from Langley to come up to DC, but those planes were still about 10 minutes away. And so then at the time we heard about the airplane that went into Pennsylvania, then I thought, oh my God, did we shoot it down?
Given all of these facts, which I encourage you to investigate for yourselves, who can we conclude was most likely the mastermind behind 9/11? Do you still think it was just Al-Qaeda? Or could Al-Qaeda really be Al-CIA? Of course, it wasn't the whole CIA, just an elite group of well-connected opportunists. Alvin Bernard, or Buzzy Krongard, was third in the CIA before 9/11 and was connected to a firm that purchased put options on American and United Airlines during the week leading up to 9/11. Options were also placed on Merrill Lynch, one of the largest World Trade Center tenants. This is clear evidence of insider trading and foreknowledge, connected directly with the CIA. Krongard is also connected with Eric Prince of Blackwater, another company that made a fortune off the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The Bin Laden Construction Group was hired to build permanent U.S. bases in Iraq, so the Bin Laden family benefited from 9/11 as well. Osama, the black sheep of the family, was a small price to pay considering the benefits. The Bush and Bin Laden families have been friends and business partners through the Carlyle Group for over 25 years. The Bush family can also be connected to nearly every single facet of the 9/11 conspiracy, from the very conception of Al-Qaeda and the Mujahideen under the Carter administration, where George Bush Sr. was Director of Central Intelligence, to the Iran-Contra scandal where he was Vice President under Reagan. In fact, George H.W. Bush is the only person to ever be Vice President, President, and Director of the CIA. The day of 9/11, George H.W. Bush was meeting with Osama bin Laden's brother, Shafiq bin Laden, on Carlyle Group business at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington. While all other flights were grounded that day, the bin Laden family was allowed to fly out of the country. Chief Pakistan spy General Mahmoud Ahmed also met with Bush administration officials the week before 9/11. Ahmed also met with Bob Graham and Porter Goss on the morning of 9/11. These are the core facts of the 9/11 conspiracy, and I encourage you to do your own research into them as well. It's pretty obvious that the people in control of this puppet government will never give us a real investigation into 9/11, as all their final reports have been replete with omissions, distortions, and lies. It is up to we the people to form organized, nonviolent resistance movements for the truth. We are soldiers in a new type of warfare, information warfare.
Because, of course, other spy rings have been caught in the US in the last decade, most notably the so-called dancing Israelis who were arrested shortly after 9/11. They were seen celebrating the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Trace Gallagher. Thank you, Trace.
That Israelis who worked at the World Trade Center were warned by the Israeli government to take the day off on 9/11.
And also the alleged art student spy ring, which was rounded up in 2002. And they, again, were supposedly Israeli Mossad agents. Now, both of these spy rings weren't prosecuted. And in fact, the stories have been quietly removed from things like Fox News websites and things. And the spies, or alleged spies, were just quietly deported back to Israel. There was no political hoo-ha. There was no media hoo-ha. And there was no...
The United States is committed to Israel's security. We are committed to that special bond.
A group of 5 men had set up video cameras aimed at the Twin Towers prior to the attack on Tuesday and were seen congratulating one another afterwards, unquote. Police received several calls from angry New Jersey residents claiming Middle Eastern men, quote unquote, with a white van were videotaping the disaster with shouts of joy and mockery. They were seen by New Jersey residents on September 11th making fun of the World Trade Center ruins and going to extreme lengths to photograph themselves in front of the wreckage. Witnesses saw them jumping for joy in Liberty State Park after the initial impact. Later on, other witnesses saw them celebrating on a roof in Weehawken.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And still other witnesses later saw them celebrating with high fives in a Jersey City parking lot. Another witness stated, quote, "It looked like they were hooked in with this. It looked like they knew what was going to happen when they were at Liberty State Park." One anonymous phone call to authorities actually led them to close down all of New York's bridges and tunnels. The mystery caller told the 911 dispatcher that a group of Palestinians were mixing a bomb inside of a white van headed for the Holland Tunnel. Here's the transcript from NBC News.
Jersey City Police.
Yes, we have a white van, 2 or 3 guys in there. They look like Palestinians and going around a building. There's a minivan heading toward the Holland Tunnel. I see the guy by Newark Airport mixing some junk, and he has those chic uniform.
He has what?
He's dressed like an Arab. The caller seems honest enough, but consider this. Why would the anonymous caller specifically say that these Arabs were Palestinians? How would he know that? Furthermore, Palestinians usually dress in Western-style clothes, not chic uniforms. Based on that phone call, police then issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for a white minivan heading for the city's bridges and tunnels from New Jersey. The description was given as this: white, 2000 Chevrolet van with urban moving system sign on back, seen at Liberty State Park, Jersey City, New Jersey, at the time of first impact of jetliner into World Trade Center. 3 individuals with van were seen celebrating after initial impact and subsequent explosion. FBI Newark Field Office requests that, if the van is located, hold for prints and detain individuals. when a van fitting the exact description was stopped just before crossing into New York, the suspicious Middle Easterners were apprehended. Imagine the surprise of the police officers when these terror suspects turned out to be Israelis. According to ABC's 2020, when the van belonging to the cheering Israelis was stopped by the police, the driver of the van, Savan Kurtzberg, told the officers,
"We are Israelis. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are your problem."
Why did he feel that the Palestinians were a problem for the NYPD? The police and FBI field agents became very suspicious when they found maps of the city with certain places highlighted. Box cutters, the same items that the hijackers supposedly used, $4,700 cash stuffed in a sock, and foreign passports. Police also told the Bergen Record that bomb-sniffing dogs were brought to the van and that they reacted as if they had smelled explosives. The FBI seized and developed their photos, one of which shows Savan Kurtzberg flicking a cigarette lighter in front of the smoldering ruins in an apparently celebratory gesture. The Jerusalem Post later reported that a white van with a bomb was stopped as it approached the George Washington Bridge, but the ethnicity of the suspects was not revealed. Here's what the Jerusalem Post reported on 12th September 2001. Quote, "American security services overnight stopped a car bomb on the George Washington Bridge. The van, packed with explosives, was stopped on an approach ramp to the bridge. Authorities suspect the terrorists intended to blow up the main crossing between New Jersey and New York," Army Radio reported, unquote. The Jewish weekly called The Forward reported that the FBI finally concluded that at least 2 of the detained Israelis were agents working for the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, and that Urban Moving Systems, the ostensible employer of the 5 Israelis, was a front operation. This was confirmed by 2 former CIA officers, and they noted that movers' vans are a common intelligence cover. The Israelis were held in custody for 71 days before being quietly released. Quote, "There was no question but that the order to close down the investigation came from the White House. It was immediately assumed at CIA headquarters that this basically was going to be a cover-up so that the Israelis would not be implicated in any way in 9/11, unquote. Several of the detainees discussed their experience in America on an Israeli talk show after their return home.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a 4-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, "Evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information." Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American Mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, "We are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies." Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives.
Do you have any doubt of the cause of September 11th?
No, none whatsoever. Matter of fact, I remember I was actually in Bethlehem, and I spoke to a group of students who questioned and actually blamed it on the Israelis, which is theater of the absurd. And they said no Jews died in 9/11. And I said, "Hope, time out. I know several widows of Jewish men who died in 9/11. There were people of every faith and those of none who were in the Twin Towers. Innocent people were slaughtered. It was an act of terrorism, the likes of which we hadn't seen since Pearl Harbor in terms of magnitude. And so there's no doubt as to who the culprits were. And I think, you know, there will always be conspiracy theories, always about everything, I guess, including that.
The FBI is responding to New Jersey because a truck reportedly loaded with explosives has been stopped by authorities on the road there, and the men with that truck have been detained. Members of the Joint Terror...
And you know what? If it doesn't work, they deserve it anyway for what they're doing. But it works.
A maverick. He's an original. He tells it like it is. And he joins us from Trump Tower in New York City. He is the leading 2016 Republican presidential contender. Donald Trump, again, joins us. And I've got so many questions. But first off, Donald, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. Great to be with you.
I've got so many questions, but you are vindicated. This has got to be the 50th time the last 6 months on the radical Muslims celebrating, not just in New Jersey, but New York, Palestine, all over. What do you have to say? They're still attacking you, though we've got Dan Rather on video. We've got New York Post. We've got Washington Post. We've got, I mean, what's going on here?
Well, I took a lot of heat, and I was very strong on it, and I held my line, and then all of a sudden, you know, hundreds of people were calling up my office. I was the other day in Sarasota, Florida, and people are in line, and we had 12,000 people, which is fantastic. And the people were saying, many of the people from New Jersey, 4 or 5 people said, Mr. Trump, I saw it myself. I was there. They talked about Patterson, but they said, I saw it myself, Mr. Trump. I was there. So many people have called in, and on Twitter, @RealDonaldTrump, they're all tweeting. So I knew it happened, and I held my line, and people wanted me to apologize, and we can't do that. People like you and I can't do that so easily. Now, we can do it if we're wrong, Alex. You apologize. I'd apologize if I was wrong. But they were celebrating, and they were celebrating the fall of the World Trade Center. I think that's disgraceful.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S.